Welcome to another MedTech Gurus podcast, where we meet and discuss trending and educational topics that are important to today's medical technology sales and marketing professionals. Now, it doesn't matter if you're new to the space or if you're a seasoned medical sales and marketing professional. You all have come to the right place. You see, the medical technology world is ever changing, and MedTech Gurus will help you stay up to date by interviewing experts and opinion leaders. Now, we call them gurus, and they will bring you information, techniques, and strategies that are sure to help you enhance your knowledge and help you bring value to your customers and your company. Now, I'm Sylvester Harris, and I'm pleased to introduce your host for MedTech Gurus, Mr. Tom Hickey.
Hey, what's going on out there, Gurus? This is Tom Hickey, your host of MedTech Gurus, and welcome to episode number 265. In this episode, we are joined by Gary Warren, CEO of IV Watch. With over 14 years at the helm of IV Watch, Gary has led the charge in revolutionizing IV therapy safety. His company has secured 69 patents and achieved widespread use in hospitals worldwide, including some of the top children's hospitals in the U.S. IV Watch's innovative biosensor technology continuously monitors IV sites to detect leaks and prevent injuries, ensuring medication flows safely into the vein. This game-changing technology has drastically improved patient outcomes by minimizing the risk of infiltration and extravasation. We'll explore the challenges of building medical technology and the importance of continuously monitoring an IV therapy. Gary will bring insights into navigating the complex world of regulatory approvals. Plus, you'll hear real-world stories from critical care settings where IV Watch has made a profound impact. Get ready for a deep dive into patient safety, innovation, and entrepreneurship as Gary walks us through his incredible journey. This is a conversation packed with insights, inspiring breakthroughs, and practical advice for anyone passionate about improving healthcare outcomes. But before we get into the episode, let's thank our sponsor, Accelerant Consulting. Gurus, the U.S. healthcare delivery system is focused on value more than ever. We have all witnessed how value analysis teams have become increasingly influential in product decision-making. Here's the problem. How do you create a value message which clearly explains the quantitative and qualitative value that distinguishes your product from the competition? Let's face it, if the value analysis team has to come back and ask questions, that can set you back months before you get back on their agenda. How much would that cost you? Let the team at Accelerant Consulting help. They can review or even design your value analysis documents, the result being having a complete document that resonates with the professionals on these teams. Reach out to the experts at Accelerant Consulting today. Learn more at excelerantconsulting.com. That's EXCELERANT consulting.com and do it today. Okay, Gurus, here it comes, episode number 265. And remember, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, tell a friend. Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have an incredible guest with us. Gary Warren, CEO of IV Watch, is here to share his insights. Gary has led IV Watch for over 14 years, and his company is dedicated to improving IV safety globally. Under Gary's leadership, IV Watch has secured an impressive 69 patents and is being used in hospitals worldwide, including 3 of the top 10 children's hospitals in the U.S. IV Watch technology is looking for drugs that start to leak outside of the vein. The tiny biosensor is applied to the skin near the IV site and performs over 18,000 checks per hour, ensuring healthcare workers are notified if an IV infiltration or extravasation in real time with a patient monitor. This technology has drastically improved patient safety by preventing fluid leakage outside the vein. Gary has an interesting background in space engineering and software security. He's got a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineer from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and an MS in aerospace engineering with a specialty in computational fluid dynamics from Mississippi State University. Gary also started his career as a research scientist at NASA for over 14 years. Hey, Gary, are you ready to be our guru today?
I am.
Oh, we're excited to have you. So tell us something fun about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Sure. I think I came from pretty humble beginnings. I grew up in northern Michigan in a very small town. It's about 2,000 people. Summers there, I was dedicated to working my mom and dad's restaurant, lived on a dirt road, and played with model airplanes and sailed in Lake Huron a little bit. Left there, went to school down at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I couldn't afford to go. That was a private engineering school, so I couldn't afford to go. And I ended up picking up a job at NASA Langley Research Center where I could go to school semester, work a semester, go to school semester, and help pay for my engineering degree. And actually met my wife on the first day of working at NASA. So my career, I worked there for about 14 years, started a software company, worked there for about 4 with Symantec. The company sold to Symantec and then worked there for another 4. Got 4 boys, still an airplane nut. One of my boys now is actually in the Blue Angels. This is his last year. I think we've been pretty successful raising our kids because they all left and never came back.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. I've done the same. So that's always a great benchmark to get them off the payroll, right? But seeing them fly the Blue Angels, that must be pretty exciting.
Oh, yeah, it's quite the honor. We get police escorted in, my wife and I, when we go to the shows, which is kind of the highlight of the show, too.
Yeah, it sounds like a blast. So, Gary, Ivy Watch has been on a really remarkable journey as I did my research. Can you tell our viewers out there a little more about how Ivy Watch started and really what drove your single-minded pursuit of improving IV safety? Can you provide us a little background there?
Sure. So, Ivy Watch, the concept has been around for about 20 years. It was actually started by a group of engineers. It was a small lab, and their business model was to apply for government grants, SBIRs. I lived next door to a pediatrician, and he was talking to him about how bad this problem was in the neonate area, newborns that are premature and stuff. So they had some ideas on using near infrared light to see if you could see if fluids were building up outside the vein. If you're getting an IV, fluids are supposed to go into the vein, not into the tissue around the vein, right? So they tried some things out, submitted the data to the National Institutes of Health, and they worked on it for about 6 years, and they really couldn't figure it out. And so the money was running out. They approached me to help them out, and I got to put my engineering hat back on. I brought over a couple of their engineers, and then one of the biggest children's hospitals in the world reached out and said, if you move your clinical work here, we will pay for that. And, that's one of the biggest line item costs in developing medical technologies that have to be FDA cleared or whatever. It's getting access to, real world clinicians and trying things out. So that saved millions. We raised a round of capital. We put 4 cubes in my basement where I was going to build a home theater, painted the walls with chalkboard paint. We built a small supercomputer with a 32 node computing cluster, bought some 3D printers, and tried to figure it out over the next 6 years, and we did. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, that sounds like a interesting adventure, and especially getting the Children's Hospital to help with that research because that is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, and you got to, and we ended up getting the whole hospital behind it, and they're actually our biggest customer today. Obviously we've gone through multiple generations of product now,
Mhm.
and we have a pretty robust pipeline. So the company today is nothing like it was when it was in my basement. Now we have a full-blown engineering team here and manufacturing and everything. But it's been a long journey. It's people, this is not like tech where you do software. If you're in medical, I think one venture firm told me it takes 17 years from concept to standard of care.
Yeah,
So it's a long journey.
yeah, for sure. And you mentioned one of the top children's hospitals using it as a customer. So in the intro, we talked about and touched on how it's used in many hospitals globally, including some of the top children's hospitals in the U.S. Can you walk us through how this technology works and the difference it's making in patient safety? Can you provide us some insights there?
Sure. So if you get an IV kit, it's interesting because there are about 2 billion IVs administered globally every year. In the US, it's over 300 million, which is about the size of the population. So it's the most common invasive procedure performed in healthcare. And without IV therapy, you're not getting drugs into people's veins. So without IV therapy, healthcare does not exist. And so it's also the most common procedure, but it's the most important one too. And one of the complications that happens is the IV can go bad, and people are familiar with this. They say, "Oh, my vein blew," or something like that. And what that is all of a sudden the drugs start leaking outside the vein into the surrounding tissue instead of going into the vasculature. And the problem with that is some of these drugs are very caustic. So if you look at like cancer patients or diabetes patients, cancer patients getting chemotherapy, and some of these drugs have pH levels that are like bleach. And if they leak out, all of a sudden your skin you get necrotic skin, you get amputations. It's very bad. In fact, the children's hospital we worked with initially said this was the number one reason they got sued, were IVs going bad. And not only is it an injury problem, there's a drug dosing error by definition. So think about if you're a stroke victim and you show up to the hospital and they miss your vein and they have to get an anticoagulant in you, you die. And they don't put in on your chart, miss the vein. It's just you died of a stroke. But it happens about 1 out of 6 times. And so we've developed something that's a little small, itty bitty sensor, about the size of a pencil eraser. And everybody understands how it works because it's the concept's simple. The execution is very complex. So we inject different colors of light into the tissue. We look at how those different colors of light are reflected back, and we can tell when drugs show up outside the vein that are not supposed to be there. And when they do, we alarm. Now, that sounds easy, but it's very complex. There's a lot of mathematics running on a patient monitor, and then there's the physical sensor development and all of that. And people have to be able to move around and all that without false alarming. So it's a very complex problem to solve. So,
Yeah, in my background, Gary, I've spent years in the IV pump business, working and selling IV pumps. And, back in the day, we used to have occlusion alarms, but those would never really pick up an infiltration, right? Because there was nothing to alarm, right? Because it would just leak out. And it seems like you're working in neonatal units as well as with the elderly, and those always seem like the most at-risk populations. Is that what you're still seeing today?
yeah, but it can happen to anybody. Those populations, you can't hide it as easily, I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
because the volume of obviously of a NICU baby is pretty small, and then elderly patients tend to have very fragile skin. I'll give you an example. I just was at the Association of Vascular Access, and we had a woman that went in. She's probably in her late 40s, has a son, and she went in for a back procedure. They gave her an injection through her IV of Phenergan and pain meds, and then extravasated, and she had half of her hand amputated, 7 surgeries. So that was just a normal person. It happens. We estimate there's about 45 to 50 million high-risk IVs every year in just the U.S., and there should be a sensor placed on those high-risk IVs to make sure that the drug's going into the vein. If it's caustic medication, if it's a life-saving medication, you need to have a sensor to make sure it's going where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, for sure. And then, Gary, I mentioned in the intro as well that your team has secured 69 patents, which is an incredible achievement. I'm wondering if you could share with us what best practices you've developed to make such a high level of innovation and secure the intellectual properties that you have. How do you keep that team motivated and going? Do you have any insights for us?
Well, I will cover 2 things. The number 2 employee at IV Watch, when I was in my basement, was a patent agent and engineer, and his job was just to document everything that we were doing and then do filings working with a law firm. The second thing is our engineering team. We don't skimp on the tools that they need. And, when I worked at NASA, the method of engineering was, when you're building an airplane, you do computer simulations first, then you build models to see if it works, and then you build the real airplane and stick a poor test pilot in it. And the way you do that in the aircraft industry and at NASA, when and like at Lockheed when the SR-71 was developed, is you put the engineers and the manufacturing people, everybody all in the same room, and they all have to talk to each other. So it's not remote work; it's everybody's in the big open room together. So we follow those practices here. They get, I will say this also. Technology has advanced so much in the last 20, 30 years. I always tell people, if I could go back in time, I'd be a kick-ass engineer now because research and development has been democratized. We have 3D printers. We have software that runs on our systems now that can solve mathematical problems that would take weeks before. now takes seconds. And you can do real research on just about anything with these off-the-shelf open source tools that are out there. So we built a tissue model, put it in our computer system, and we were submitting jobs to it. And it also was, these were all gaming computers. We didn't use them for gaming, but that, you've seen that with AI, like the NVIDIA. They came out with these graphics boards for the gaming world, and now they're being used for computational work in AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just such a wonderful development. If you're a nerdy guy like me, is the tools that are available to engineers there just astonishing.
Do you find with that, all those tools and all that capability, do you ever run across the shiny object syndrome? Do you have to kind of keep folks focused, or do you just kind of let them explore and then see what comes of it?
No, we definitely have a shiny object syndrome going on, but you have to throttle it based on funding that's available. So some of this stuff's not that expensive anymore. But we do try. We've tried things out and they don't work. Failures are just as good as successes because you find out what doesn't work.
Mhm.
But you have to keep a little bit on top of the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, I would think. But, also you touched on this as well with medical products, that there's a tremendous mountain to climb with getting things through the FDA process. So tell me a little bit about that manufacturing, regulatory, engineering, and quality teams that you touched on, keeping all that coordinated. How does that help in getting that product eventually FDA authorized and cleared?
Yeah, so we have our own regulatory team. Holly Novak runs that for us. She's incredible. But she's in the middle of all the engineers and manufacturing, and her team is, you know, and being at NASA, I didn't understand the whole QMS is what you're referring to and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. Yeah. I mean, we can't even put out a social post without people approving it, which takes a little while to get used to. You just have to have the right people and the right reporting structure. So the regulatory team reports directly to me. So people can't override them in the engineering side, right? Because the engineers will say, forget that, I'm doing it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, but everybody seems to understand the quality thing. We've had 12 regulatory audits here at IV Watch. But we have never had a major finding. And, I'm always worried someday they're going to have a finding. But right now we run a pretty tight ship on the quality and manufacturing and stuff. Never had a recall.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations on that. And then solving the problem, you touched on solving the issue with infiltrations, et cetera. I'm just kind of curious why you've not really had any competitors come to market. I mean, there's so many big players out there in the IB business, right? But they don't seem like they figured that out. What makes it unique that you guys and your team was able to do this?
Well, if you listen to me, you think that we knew what we were doing and we started doing it and it was a straight line and then we were done, right? But that's not quite how it works. And, the competitors, they're out there. I mean, you yourself even mentioned about the occlusion alarm. So a lot of the infusion pump manufacturers went down this path of solving the problem by sending pressure waves down tubes and doing these different things with pressure alarms. And they tried to get them through the FDA and they never could show that they worked. And the reason is they didn't have a fundamental understanding of what the problem was. Everybody thinks that an infiltration, and I use the word infiltration, extravasation, just interchangeably. One's about, caustic drugs and the other one's not. Everybody was under the assumption that an infiltration is the tip of the catheter, the tip of the needles poking through the vein and lodged in the subcutaneous tissue. And that ends up not being true. If you give a vasopressor, something like dopamine, somebody that's, you got to constrict their blood vessels. They've been bleeding a lot or whatever, and you got to get the core blood pressure up. It's not a matter of when that IV is going to go bad or if that IV is going to go bad, it's when. And it's because things like a vasopressor end up damaging the endothelium on the vein wall. And then the vein becomes porous downstream of the catheter. And that has nothing to do with pressure. You can get a flush, you can get a blood return, but the thing's still leaking. And the other thing that they teach clinicians now on how to give IVs is when you put an IV in, people think they're steel needles. They're not. You start with a steel needle to get the plastic polyurethane catheter and you back the steel needle out. The steel needle just punctures the vein and gives you that hole. But what they do is they go down to the vein, they get a flashback of blood when they hit the vein, and then they keep going until they don't get a flashback. and then they back it up a little bit and then slide the polyurethane catheter off. And that's in textbooks now. And what you've done is created punctures on the other side of the vein wall. And even though the polyurethane catheter is still in the vein, it's going to leak. So I think the pump manufacturers, back to the question of why haven't they figured it out? Their assumptions of what the problem was were wrong. And they thought they could do it with pressure because they thought it was tip of catheter lodged. And we came along and we said, you know what? We don't care how the fluid got there. We're just going to look for the drug. And it was just a different approach. And, and do they all try to copy us now? Yeah, I know some big companies that are chasing that technology, but it's very difficult. You have to solve a series of partial differential equations on the patient monitor, and you have to have the sensor geometrically designed perfectly, or it just won't work.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. And, you know, I do have some background in IV technology and safety over the years, and it seems like even after all these years, it's still an emerging field.
Yeah.
Do you see something like your technology following a similar trajectory of pulse oximetry, become a widely adopted patient safety standard?
I do. In fact, that's kind of our business model if you look at some of the public pulse oximeter companies or non-invasive sensing, the IV site is an incredible space of real estate on the human body to do monitoring. I don't know about you, but I've been in the hospital and the whole fingertip thing is really annoying. I went in with a right broken arm and then the left broken arm, they put pulse ox on and they say, Mr. Warren, you need to get up and go to the bathroom. I'm like, how am I going to do that?
Yeah, right.
So the IV site's a little more, it's protected, it's a little more robust. And I think, continuous monitoring is a wide open field right now. The gold standard right now for IV therapy for detecting these things is you wait for the injury to show up, which is really a terrible gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
And continuous monitoring across the board for various other things that's where there should be a lot of work. And there is a lot of work. But you have to be able to understand the problem, not just develop a physical sensor and stick it on. The mathematics behind all this stuff is quite complex.
Yeah, for sure. And then in doing my research, I also noted a study out of Wilhelmina's Children's Hospital that showed the efficacy of IV sensors in their intensive care nursery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that study and the real world impact that IV Watch is having in this type of critical care environment?
Yeah, so that's over at UMC. It's in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And there's a gentleman there named Joshua that's a clinician. And he found IV Watch and wanted to do an evaluation. And, I can't just take a medical device to another country. I got to go through all the regulatory process of that country. So we did all that. And he did a small study that was published and had great results. But here's where the story gets interesting. Joshua knew a photographer. He's a pretty famous sports photographer. And he had been injured as a small child with an IV. And so they were talking, and Joshua was telling about the problems he's having. He said, well, can I come in and take pictures? And so this photographer came in and took pictures of all the injuries that were happening in this NICU, and they published them in several newspapers around the Netherlands. And then Joshua started up essentially something like a GoFundMe page and said, we need to outfit our hospital with IV Watch. And they raised over $300,000 from over 3,000 people in the community that said no more. And now they have IV Watch running in that hospital and they haven't had any injuries in months. So it's quite an amazing story.
Yeah, it's quite a testimonial, right? In a sense of you're thinking about the retrospective look at those injuries and now there's been nothing, right? So it's quite the testimonial. Is that a study that has that been published? Is that a public,
It's peer reviewed and published now. And there's several others now. There's in the United Kingdom, the NHS over there, they put the guy that's in charge of their vascular access society there runs an infusion center. And they do about 20,000 infusions. These are just adults come in for treatment it's non-chemotherapy. So it's like blood products like immunoglobulin and iron and stuff. And he was having 2 to 3 injuries a week in 24 chairs. They put IV Watch in for 2 weeks. There's a study that just came out in British Journal of Nursing. They put IV Watch in for a few weeks, and he says, I can't take it out because I haven't had any injuries. It's been in there over a year. They've had 0 injuries.
That's remarkable. I'm thinking about not only the patient outcomes and the things that are improving the lives of patients to not have these injuries, but from a return on investment, that's got to be an incredible enhancement for these facilities as well.
Yeah, because you have to, in the ROI model, you have to look at the cost of the drug too. So if you put in a half a bag of immunoglobulin into somebody and then you realize it didn't go into the vein, you have to start over. And that can be a $20,000 bag of drugs.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then then the potential for injury and all that starts cascading and adding into those costs. So that's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Now, I'm not claiming we're 100%. I want to be clear of that.
Mm-hmm.
The FDA gives us, with the data that we have, we claim 99% sensitivity in 10 cc's or less. We pick up in as little as 0.2 cc's. The average is about 2. So, once in a while one will get through, but you'll definitely get, if you follow the indications for use and everything, you definitely get a huge decrease in issues. So,
yeah, fantastic. So, Gary, it really has been a tremendous story, and it seems like a very exciting time for your team at IV Watch. What's next? What's the future hold for you and your team? Where are you going from here?
Well, the short-term strategy is really we're opening up our sensor technology to detect more personalized drugs, I'll say, unique signatures. So, we're working right now on a lipid-based sensor, which, a little different spectral signature. And then, basically tying some of the sensors to the unique properties of some of the more problematic drugs. The other area that we're working on is plugging our sensor technology. We have the format of the product now is like a pulse oximeter almost. We have a patient monitor, mounts on the IV pole, and then we have disposable sensors that hook to a patient cable. So it's similar to how you would think of a pulse ox, but instead of going on the finger, it's going on the IV site. But not everybody wants to buy patient monitors. So we have in our pipeline things we're doing with plugging into other monitor systems. You can't have 12 monitors in a room. I even think the IV, people disagree with me on this. The IV pumps out there in the world, that's 30-year-old technology at the end of the day. And people don't want that. They kind of want to have a cartridge that just snaps onto the line and it talks to the big patient monitor in the room. And so I think there's some consolidation going on between some of these even pumps and monitors and everything into single screen patient care.
Yeah, that would make sense, right? Because you get all this various equipment. Sometimes you can't even see the patient, right? When you walk into someone, you see it. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, people ask us when we're coming out with a wireless sensor, and I say, well, as soon as we get tubeless IVs, we'll go wireless. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Gary, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you for all the time and preparation it took to be our guru today. If somebody wants to learn more about you or IV Watch or connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you? Or are you on LinkedIn? Is there a website? How do we learn more?
Yeah, you can go. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So it's Gary Warren. If you search for Gary Warren IV Watch, and then our website has web forms people fill in as well. So that's just ivwatch.com. So, it's kind of fun working for a company where the name is actually what we do.
Yeah, that makes it easy, right?
Yeah.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for being our guru today. We really appreciate your thoughts and insights and appreciate your time.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048@gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.